so we had a problem. We had a problem that said a man's age at death was 1/29th of the year of his birth. How old was he in 1982? Okay, now a lot of you answered the question because it just asked for the answer to the question. I don't know how you got there. We want to go through the process that we were talking about, right? Let's understand the problem first before we do anything else. Those of you who answered the question, how much guessing did you do along the way? A bit of guessing, right? What'd you say? Okay, so we made, there was a lot of, we're going to do this with absolutely no guesswork at all. All right? And to do this with, again, not to say that guessing is a bad thing as long as each guess tells you something, but we want to, in this case, see that there actually is enough information in this problem to not need any guessing at all. So the first step is we want to write down everything that we know, right? We want the understanding the problem portion of this. What do we know? So when we read this, what do we know?
He was alive in 1982.
How do we know he was alive in 1982? So what if he wasn't born until 1983 or 2000? Then what? We wouldn't ask that question, would we? We might ask it if we didn't realize that he was born in 1983. We might ask the question and then like, oh, I'm sorry, and then take it away, right? So the question wouldn't still be there if he was not born until later. All right? What if he had died before 1982? What would we ask in that case?
How old was he when he died?
Now, if he had died before 1982, what would this question say?
How many years ago did he die?
Yeah, we would say something like, how old would he have been in 1982? Right? So we know he was alive in 1982 because if he was born later, we wouldn't ask the question. And if he had died before, we would have asked a different question. How old would he have been? And so how do we know that he was alive in 1982? We know he was alive in 1982 because that's the way the English language works. Right? So what are we assuming? We're assuming that whoever asked this question is asking a legitimate question using the rules of English. And that's the only assumption we're making. Right? We're not assuming things about whatever else. We're just saying, okay, assuming that this is a valid question following the rules of the English language, he was alive in 1982. Is that a huge assumption to assume that the question was following the legitimate rules of the English language? That's not a very big assumption because it's asked in English. And so we assume that it follows those rules. All right, so that's not a huge assumption. So we know he was alive in 1982. What else do we know? How do we know that he is dead? Okay, so it says a man's age at death. Now, we're going to talk about all of our ages at death. We're going to think about our ages at death. But we're all still alive. You can talk about an age at death and not be dead. Why would you say this man is dead now?
Because it says if his
Yeah, because it's past tense, right? It says was. And again, assuming that we are using English correctly, talking about age of death isn't the thing that makes it clear that he has died. It's talking about his age of death in the past tense. All right, so when did he die? Let's not go there yet, right? When did he die?
After 1982.
Okay, so he died after 1982 and before, before like last Wednesday or whatever, right? Whenever you saw this problem the first time. So maybe we just say, we'll just be quite general about it and just say he died before 2021. Okay, so really, more specifically, before last Wednesday, or again, whatever day we saw this problem the first time. Okay, so he was alive in 1982. We know that. He died before now. We know that. Again, we know that based on that one very simple assumption. All right, what else do we know?
His age has to be a multiple.
Okay, let's not talk about the 129th thing yet, right? There's a lot more to think. As soon as we think about the 129th thing, we want to start doing something. So let's not think about that part yet, right? Let's not use that part yet. Let's put that off until later. What else do we know about this man? Okay, so it's a person that we're talking about. So we know something about life expectancy. But life expectancy is based on an average kind of thing, right? And it depends on where a person is from and so on. So what can we say for sure about him? How old was he when he died? What can we say about his age at death? Again, not worrying about the 129th or anything like that. Just what can we say about how old he was when he died? What's the oldest he could have been? So we can push that 110 years up a little bit further. What's the oldest he could have been? Well, we can look up to see what the oldest person is, right? What's the record for the oldest person? And I think if you look up the record, it's something like 122 years. And I think that was a woman, so it could be a little bit less than that. But we no more than that, right? So his age at death was no more than 122 or so, right? Some number there that we can. A few years ago, there was a person in South Africa who claimed to be 130. And it was based on memories that he had, and he said, "Oh, I remember this thing happening and this thing happening," and it had happened at a particular point. And it turned out, I mean, they didn't keep records where he was from, so they didn't know for sure. But they checked other things, and I think they determined he was really actually in his 80s. But he had been told things that had happened. And at a certain point, sometimes if you think about it, there are things that you're not sure if they happened to you or somebody just told you about them, like when you were little. So it's like, did that happen to me, or was that just like a family story that I've heard a lot? And apparently there were family stories that had been around for a long time. So you didn't realize maybe a 50-year period or something. Some of those stories were from a long time before. So the confirmed record somewhere around this level. How do we know it's a person?
Not really, because
So when we use the word man, what does that mean?
man is more humanoid,
Right?
Than
Man.
gender.
So we're looking, so we're looking this up, and this is talking about. We look up a definition of a word like that, right? What does it mean? So again, we're coming back to assuming English. right? So if we assume English, which we have done so far, and all of our conclusions have been based on assuming English, then we have this limitation on possible age. All right, what's the youngest he could have been when he died? Okay, so it says man's age at death. So we have the issue of 18 that we tend to think of as being the distinguishing line. Some cultures around the world, that line happens at 13. And some cultures, I know of some situations where it's even as young as 9. But there is some point, right? There is some line that says this is the transition from being a child to being a man. What if he had been much younger? What if this person had died when it was, when he was like 1? What would we have said? We wouldn't have used the word man. We would have said maybe even baby, right? A 1-year-old, we might have said baby. And then a little bit older, we would have said child. And then maybe, but at some point, we transition, right? And so typically, in this area, right, we would say 18. So we can go with that. His age at death was at least 18. Okay, what else do we know? Again, there's more stuff that we know in here. So let's think about what else we know. Can you think of anything else? That's doing something. There's some calculation involved in that, right? We don't know that from just reading these words. All of this stuff we know from just reading the words, right? Actually, this number we don't know from reading the words, but we knew there was a number, and we would look that number up, right? So that's the only thing that involved doing something. We know that there's an oldest person. There's a number for that. And so let's not say anything right now that involves needing to do any kind of calculation or anything else, right? What kind of when we talk about an age, what kind of thing are we using? What are we talking about? It's a whole number, right? When we talk about an age, it's a positive integer, except not always. When do we talk about ages in ways that are not positive integers? Let's talk about that little baby. When there's a newborn baby, at first it's this many hours old. Then it's this many days old. And they're still whole numbers, but it's not years, right? Then it's this many months old. Or maybe weeks in between or something, right? But then this many months old. When do we stop talking about a baby's age in months?
2 years?
Yeah, usually about 2 years old, right? It's 18 months, it's 20 months. Okay, now it's 2. And then it's 3, and right, and we go with whole numbers from there. Are there any other points in our lives when we talk about our ages not as whole numbers? If you're from Ohio, what does 15 and a half mean?
Oh, you can get like a permit, right?
You can get like a driving learner's permit, right? At 15 and a half. What does that a half mean? At the 6-month mark, right? At your half birthday, you can get a driving permit. Other times when a half. When does a child become 9 and a half?
6 months after his birthday.
About 2 days after their 9th birthday, don't they say, "Oh, I'm 9 and a half now," right? But it's not really, right? There's no actual meaning to 9 and a half. But 15 and a half, there's in Ohio at least, there's a legal meaning for that. And there's some other points, like 70 and a half turns out to be something with retirement issues or something, right? There's a certain other time where and a half matters, right? So there are some times that we would talk about ages not in whole numbers, but very, very rarely. And when we talk about how old someone was when they died, unless they happen to be like the absolute oldest person, if you look up the oldest person, it goes this many years and this many months and this many days, right? Because they're setting some kind of record. If you did some amazing feat as the youngest person to ever have done it, then they would also talk about your age in years, months, and days. And if two people tied, then they would probably look at what time they were born, right? But only in those extreme situations do we ever talk about age in any other way, right? Once you become a certain age, you're that age until next year, right? For the whole year. So age are positive integers. And what else? What other numbers are involved here?
1982 is a whole number.
Okay, but in more generally than that, there's other year. There's another year involved in this, right? So years are also positive integers. Now we could talk about years before, say BCE or something, where it's not really a negative number, it's still a positive integer, but it's kind of counting the other way. But we're talking about people who are alive, and no one who was alive in 1982 was alive 2,000 years before. And so we don't have to worry about anything like that, right? For our purposes, ages and years are positive integers. So far we've listed all of this information, things that we know. Did we know 10 minutes ago that we knew all of this? No, there's a lot here, right? There's a lot of information in here. And it's all just from the words themselves, except that one number and the specific value of that number. Right? So there's some looking something up here, and maybe some cultural value determining the 18. Is there anything else that we know? Anything at all? Yeah, we know that 129 thing now, right? I already have it written down up here. I'm not going to write that part down again. So we do know that. We don't want to forget that we know it. I kept pushing it off until we got more things. But we know all of this other stuff too. And if we focus on that part, we forget to look for the other pieces. All right, so this is the what do we know. Now, we think about what do we not know. I mean, we don't know where this person lived. Right? We don't know this person's name. There's a lot of things we don't know, but that aren't necessarily relevant. We can come back to those and see. What do we need to know? It's another aspect of understanding the problem. What do we need to know?
The year he was born.
Now, what do we need to know? Let's not do anything yet. What do we need to know? We need to know how old was he in 1982, right? We need to know his age in 1982. That's what we need to know. Okay, so this is what we know, and that's what we need to know. Now let's push it a little bit further now and tend toward the devising a plan approach. This is what we need to know. So how could we figure out, if I wanted to find out how old you were in 2015, what could I do? There's two things I could do.
Because it's a vector age from 2015.
Yeah, I could find out how old you are now and count back. All right, so how old are you now? And let's count back 6 years. Back that way, right? Count back 6 years. Or I could find out what? When you were born and do a subtraction problem there. Right? You were born here and here's 2015. How many years are there between here? Okay, so let's think about the first thing. Can we find out how old this guy is now and count back to 1982?
No.
Why not? Why can we not do that with this guy?
Because it would be, I guess, anywhere between
Not because of a guess, it's because he's not alive now. We can't say how old is he now because he's not alive now, right? And we don't talk about ages of people. After we would have to say, how old would he have been, right? We can't say how old is he, which we can do for us in 2015. So what do we need instead? In order to answer this, we need to know what year was he born, right? So instead of this question, we need to answer this question. So we had a question, but now we have a new question. All right, so what year was he born? Do we know anything about what year he was born? The year he was born had to have been 1982 or before. And we also know something about 129th up there, right? Okay, so we have this question, and then we have a new question. And that's where we are right now. We know this information. We need to know this, and we've thought a little bit about how to use that in terms of devising a plan if we can figure this part out. Okay, so let's come back to the understanding portion a little bit, and let's look at that 129th thing now. The year that he was born matters. That turns out we need to find that, right? That's what we need right here in order to be able, we will fill in the details of what's going to happen here in just a minute, how you use that, but we need that. So let's look at the 129th thing. All right, do we know this man's age at death? No. So what do we do when we don't know a value? I'm sorry? We can make a variable, right? Now, if we're programming, we could call this variable age at death. But we're writing this down in this way, so we need a variable. What variable do you think is a good name for that variable? Probably not something like x, right? Because x is not very descriptive. The thing about using a to represent age, we have two ages that we care about. Right? We have an age at death, and we also have his age in 1982 that we care about, and we might get those confused. So maybe, I don't know, D? We can have lots of choices, right? But just something that's easy for us to remember and relative to what it represents. Now, again, programming-wise, we can be much more descriptive, right? We would want to be more descriptive. So I'll call this D just because we remember D, death, okay? Now, let's keep translating. Was. How do you translate was from English into mathematics? Let's see. Was is the past tense of is, and is means equal. All right, so we have translated this first part, D equals. What is D? D equals a man's age at death. D means a man's age at death. This is was. Let's translate 129th. Well, that translates as 129th. What about the word of? Of means multiply. And what about the year of his birth? We could call that B, maybe? Okay, so what happens? We have translated this first statement into mathematics. D equals 129th times B. All right, so we know that. We don't have to do anything with that right now. That's a known value. We look down here at what we're trying to do. So we went back to understanding, and now we're going back to where we were in terms of can we go further. What year was he born? Can we figure out what year he was born? Yeah, we can solve that for B. We have D equals 129th times B. We want to find out what year he was born, so let's solve this for B. What does that mean? What is B?
D times 29.
All right, I'm going to write it in the other order. B is 29 times D. And we've answered the question. What year was he born? 29 times what year he died. Except what does that mean? And we had this question. Then we had a new question. Now what do we have? Now we have a new question, which is, how old was he when he died? Right, so our task here, the original problem, has been turned into, first of all, what year was he born? And then that got turned into, how old was he when he died? So if we can figure out how old he was when he died, we can do what? Figure out when he was born. If we figure out when he was born, how do we answer this question? His age in 1982. How do we solve that? 1982 minus B. Yeah, we would do 1982 minus B, right? So if we can figure out how old he was when he died, we can then figure out exactly what year he was born, and then figure out how old he was in 1982 from there. So from our understanding, we have our plan, except we don't have a plan for this problem yet, right? So we'll come to that one in just a minute. Now, the age in 1982, the issue is, before his birthday, after his birthday, right? So we're thinking about how old did he turn that year, right? And when somebody dies, they could die in the fall, like instead of the year that they turned that, they might die during the next calendar year before their birthday. So we're not going to worry about those kind of subtle aspects right now, right? We will see that it all works out in the end. But that could be an issue, right? So when we're saying how old was he in 1982, we're saying how old did he turn that year? At his birthday, how old, what was his age then? All right, so it turns out for us that we saw that it was useful to translate this first thing into symbols because we can do something with the mathematical symbols. So let's try to do the same thing with the other information that we have. All right, so first of all, we had that from the first statement, and we saw that it was more useful to us in this format. All right, so we have that first statement in mathematics form. So let's see if we can translate he was alive in 1982 into an equation or an inequality of some type. How can we say that he was alive in 1982? Say it again. B is less than or equal to 1982. Does that say he was alive in 1982? Yeah. What does that say, actually? That says he was born in 1982 or before. He could have been born in 1540, and this still be true. So this doesn't say he was alive in 1982. It just says he was born 1982 or before, which is part of being alive in 1982, right? But it's not all of it. This part says he was born 1982 or before. To make sure he's alive in 1982, what do we have to do?
D is greater than 1982.
D is greater than 1982? D is how old he was when he died.
You would also...
Okay, so B plus D. You think about what year you were born and how long you lived, and that is the year you died, right? Again, the year you died or the following year before the birthday, but again. So we could say it like this. He was born 1982 or before, and he died sometime after 1982. Again, 1982 or later. Does that make sense? So what does this say? This says he was alive in 1982. Make sense? Born then or before, died then or later. One part by itself, one piece, just that part, just the left part or just the right part doesn't tell that by itself, right? But both sides together tell us, yes, this guy was alive in 1982. So we've translated this to mathematics. What about he died before 2021? B plus D, since we said he died before 2021, it actually would be a less than. But if we said before, today, then we could put the or equal to. But the way it's worded, it says he died before 2021. So B plus D. Does that make sense? He died sometime before now. All right, let's keep going. His age at death was no more than 122. D is less than or equal to 122. All right. His age at death was at least 18. D is greater than or equal to 18. Ages and years are positive integers. All right. So what do we have at this point? We had all of this that we didn't realize we knew, but now we know, right? Now we know that we know these things. And we've converted those into this kind of format. All right. So what are we trying to answer right now? Our question is, how old was he when he died? So do we know anything at all about how old he was when he died? That's our target, right? We're trying to figure out how old he was when he died. So do we know anything about that? This is our question. Is there anything in here that tells us about that?
Is before between 18 and 20.
Yeah, we know that D is between 18 and 122. Okay, so we're not thinking about birth years right now, right? We said we're to the point of caring about how old he was when he died. And so we don't necessarily, at this point, for this particular approach, we don't need to worry about what his birth year was at this point. Now, yeah, we see up here, because these are positive integers, that to make that happen, the birth year would have to be divisible by 29. That comes from this portion. But we're focusing on how old he was when he died, and we do know something about that. Now, that's a big range. But what could we do? We could, if we wanted to, start guessing ages and checking to see if that age, when you put it into that particular birth year, if it fits the other criterion. Right? Does it fit this criterion? Does it fit this one? Does it fit, right? Well, we would have picked some things from here, so it would definitely fit these. So we could do a bunch of guessing, but each one of those guesses would narrow the possibilities down. So we could do that, but let's not do that. What else do we know about how old he was when he died? Let's take a look at this portion. We have 1982 is less than or equal to B plus D. And B plus D is less than 2021. So we have another kind of chain of values. But that one involves B and D. And you had brought up the birth year, and that involves that again. Is there anything that we can do with this to make this only be in terms of how old he was when he died? Take a look at that. What can we do with that B right there? We could turn it into 29D. So what do we know? We know that 29D plus D is between 1982 and 2021. Which means what? 29D plus D is 30D. So we know that 30D is between 1982 and 2021. So this is something else about his age. Right? Just about his age. So can we solve an inequality like that? Now we're, again, moving on to doing something. Right? We have the understanding. We understand this is how old he was when he died. How would we solve this inequality? Yeah, divide everything by 30. So what happens when you divide 1982 by 30? Get 66.06, and it repeats. And that's less than or equal to D. And when you divide 2021 by 30, you get 67.36, and that repeats. Now, what do we know about D? D has to be a positive integer, and it's between these two numbers. So what positive integers are there between these two numbers?
67.
The only positive integer between those numbers is 67. Right? 66 is below that, and anything else is above that. The only positive integer is 67. Does that make sense? So what do we have? We know from what we wrote down exactly how old he was when he died. He was 67 years old when he died. So what can we do? Calculate what year he was born and find his age in 1982. All right, now let's come back to this. We spent a lot of time talking about the cultural value here of 18 and the number that we looked up of 122. Where did we use that? We didn't use it, right? Turned out to be something that we know, but we didn't need it. And so it was beneficial for us to think about it. It let us know that we did know something about how old he was when he died. So we could have guessed, using a different approach, we could have started guessing there, figuring out, okay, this person, well, okay, that's too young, or this person's too old. But when we got an answer, we wouldn't know for sure that we had all of the answers. But this approach right here tells us there's only one person. Now, what if this had been 68 point something instead of 67 point something?
Then you would have D is equal to 67 and D is equal to 68.
Yeah, then we have two possibilities. D is 67 or 68, and then there would be two answers for the problem. If there were three possibilities or whatever, right, these would be more possibilities. And without extra information, we wouldn't be able to know for sure which one we're talking about. What if this number was still this, but this had been 66.36? What would that mean? There is no integer in between there. And that would mean there is no person that satisfied those particular criteria. Right? There is no person whose age at death was 1/29th of the year of his birth, who died in that particular year, or who was alive in that particular year. So that's possible. I mean, we could change the numbers somehow and maybe get more than one answer here, or maybe get no answers here. But the idea is we don't have to guess. This would tell us. Now, what we have to do, we still have to check all of our work, check all the pieces, and make sure. If we got two answers, we still have to check and make sure that everything was done correctly. If we got no answers, we check and make sure. We got one answer at this point, check and make sure. But the idea is that starting from here, if we go through the process of really thinking about everything we know and planning this, we can get an answer with absolutely no guesswork at all. All right? Again, not to say that guessing is necessarily bad. It's just a lot less necessary than we often think. So in this problem, it looked like we didn't have enough information. Did we? Yeah. In other problems, like the one we saw with the symbols, it looks like we had, well, it turns out that we had too much information, but the hard part was figuring out what to get rid of. In this case, the hard part is figuring out, okay, what do we really know in this? Instead of jumping in and trying to do something, instead of starting to guess, what do we really know? And now that we've gone through this, we see, yeah, there was a lot of stuff. There's a lot there that we know. Was it all useful? Not all of it, but enough of it was in order for us to be able to answer the question with absolutely no guesswork at all. Make sense?